this month's edition of Brown Bagging It in My Backyard. And this is brought to you by Nature in My Backyard, which is an initiative of the Audubon Society of Greater Cleveland, the Master Gardeners of Cuyahoga County on the Shaker Lakes Garden Club. It's designed to encourage folks to turn their backyards into viable native habitat that actually hosts native biodiversity and contributes to a solution, if you will, and not necessarily more of a problem. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today. A couple things, some housekeeping things. Number one is if you can both turn your cameras off and mute your microphones. We will be entertaining questions, but we'll do so at the end. And if you have questions throughout our conversation, go ahead and post them in the chat and we will get to them. Next month, our Brown Bagging It from the Backyard will feature our own Matt Valensic, who's the chair of the Education Committee at the Audubon Society of Greater Cleveland. He's a master gardener, a master birder, and just a master of cool things all around. And he'll be discussing good bug, bad bug, which, you don't want to miss that. What are the good insects in our backyard? And what are the ones that we need to be concerned about? So with that business taken care of, today it is a great honor to welcome Ginger Woolridge to Brown Bagging It. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, Harvey. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to read just a little bit of her bio, and then we want to do a deep dive into who you are and your background. Ginger is an author, speaker, and landscape consultant with a long-held focus on the health of our environment. In 2018, she and Tony Dove, a retired Smithsonian Institution horticulturist, published Essential Native Trees and Shrubs for the Eastern U.S. This book, which has become, by the way, a Bible for all of us that are working in Nature in My Backyard, provides a useful guide to many of the native woody plants that support our diminishing insect and bird populations, and it has become an invaluable resource for many in the sustainable landscaping movement nationwide. Ginger's education includes a BS in landscape architecture from the Penn State University and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She's a master naturalist and served for 10 years on the board of a Maryland-based smart growth advocacy group. Her current focus is the protection of native flora, especially our canopy trees. These trees are threatened by out-of-balance deer populations and an epidemic of invasive plants, some of which continue to be sold in garden centers. To this end, in 2023, she co-founded the Annapolis-based nonprofit Save Our Trees. Through action, education, and advocacy, the group helps our city, county, communities, and individuals save our woodlands from fatal vine infestations. And we'll talk more about that, and we'll post a link, but the link is saveourtreestogether.org. So again, welcome to this edition of Brown Bagging It from the Backyard, and thanks for helping us bring the gospel message of why we should be fostering sustainable landscaping in our yards and in our communities.
Well, thank you for having me. It's real. Your education and outreach and just general knowledge is so. For your group, it sounds like really, really inspiring.
It's fun, Ginger. The group, particularly the group that are the volunteers that are actually making site visits to people's homes and advising them on what's invasive, what's native in their yard, and the steps that they can take to start converting their yard to viable habitat. It's a wonderfully eclectic and curious group. Most of them are master gardeners, so they've got a tremendous amount of just sort of hands in the dirt, practical knowledge about gardening. But they come from all walks of life, and everyone is committed to the same goal of, as I know you are, of creating a viable, sustainable landscaping. So let's just get into you, because you, in our conversation last week, I was just fascinated by your kind of career trajectory that brought you here, like from commercial real estate and your MBA at the Wharton School. Tell us about Ginger and how you got here.
Well, I think in the beginning that was almost more, that was sort of a spur, but I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, Appalachian, Pennsylvania, and I was sort of free labor on a pony farm, and I rode horses a lot, and I would show a lot of weekends, but most of the time I was riding by myself in the woods. And so I think I just, at that point, just really, nature just became very important to me. And then I went to college in Virginia and then Penn State and studied landscape architecture because of my interest in nature. And then when I got out of school, there was quite a downturn in the economy. So I went into construction management and then decided that I might like to go to business school. And I ended up buying commercial real estate, shopping centers and office buildings around the country, but I always really missed nature. Then I did, took the turn and raised children, and then had a political action committee but was short-lived for a year around one election, and then did the smart growth advocacy group throughout that. And then Tony asked me to help him write this book. And there really wasn't a source for homeowners that was concise with only 85 select plants. I mean, Durr has 1,000 pages of wonderful information, but it's not really available to the homeowner, what kind of native plants that are available that you can really plant. So we went into the deep dive in the book, and that really turned me on to how troubled our native landscape is. And certainly in the mid-Atlantic, the canopy is threatened almost everywhere. The woods are pretty see-through because of the out of balance deer population. And certainly the vines, there's so much woodland edge that the vines are killing a lot of trees there. So that's when I ran into a friend, and we just got going, and now there are 5 of us, and a lot of women. It's a group of retired women who basically have that we all have different skill sets that work really well together. So we have a breakfast meeting every week, and usually have an activity or 2 every week as well. So that's where we are today.
Well, so let's start with where you are today, and then we're going to work our way back to the book, and then we want to find out about more spark moments in your life. But so Save Our Trees, you came together to form this volunteer-based group that's all about action and education and advocacy. So what was it that first you saw that, you saw some beautiful shade tree that was just choking on English ivy and said, I need to do something? Or how did that come about? And then we're very interested in other volunteer-based groups, since Nature in My Backyard is entirely volunteer-based, and what kind of response you're getting in the communities in which you're active.
Well, it was interesting the way it started. I ran into a woman I knew who she was. I'm not even sure she knew who I was, at our film festival. And I had been complaining about the English ivy that I'd seen on our roadsides. Just, we have a lot of tulip poplars that came in to, fill the spot of the chestnut trees around here. And they're good 80 feet tall along our roads, and they're just vines draping from them. And certainly other trees too, our oaks and hickories and all of that. Anything that's on the roadside in Maryland is likely to have English ivy on it. So that was hard for me to see. So I just started kind of complaining almost everywhere I went. And Susan said, well, I was told somebody from the city that I was going to retire and I wanted to do something for the city. And she asked this fellow, and he said, Save Our Trees. And so when I complained about the ivy to Susan, she told me that story. It was like it was a Friday or Saturday morning, end of the film festival. And she had been operating for 10 years, all of the volunteers. So she's really good at communicating with volunteers. So I said, okay, let's have coffee like in 3 days. And Susan had never been on, what's it called? It's a Facebook group, Next Door. And she had never been on it before, but she thought, I'm just going to ask who cares about this. And by the 3 days later, when she had coffee with me, 85 people had responded.
My goodness.
So that was very encouraging. And then we found the other 3 folks that are on the team with us. One of them used to run international projects and compliance for Price Waterhouse. So she runs our meetings, and she is really good. So we don't get off track too much. Another friend has a master's from UVA in environmental science, and she's been president of a land trust. And then another woman is what we actually did. What really helped us as a nonprofit is we folded ourselves into a group called the Watershed Stewards Academy. Our county has more waterfront. This congressional district has more waterfront than any other congressional district in the country, because we're on the bay and there's so many tributaries. So there's a really great group that trains watershed stewards, and they do a class of 20 every year, and they do, intensive training and projects. So they had this group called Tree Troopers where they plant trees. And so we talked to them and said, we don't really want to do all the accounting for a nonprofit and stuff like that. Maybe there's a synergy here, because you're planting trees and we're trying to protect the existing ones, which we think is economic. And it's important to plant, but economically, all these trees need to be taken care of. Why not protect the ones that have all this biomass now?
That's a great message right there. I mean, the trees that we've got, what kind of condition are they in, and what are we doing to actually keep them healthy? How are we stewarding the existing canopy that we have in our suburbs, in our yards, in our towns and cities?
Yeah.
And yes, I know that also. I just was showing out there that we often talk about English ivy as one of the really bad invasives. And of course, so many people just see it as a ground cover, and they think that they can attack it there, and they don't realize the damage it actually can do to a shade tree and kind of strangle it.
Yeah, and I think trees that have it as a ground cover, in my opinion, don't always look so good either. I think it really does steal some nutrients from trees. Yeah.
So carry on. So you've got this remarkable group of leaders in this, and how many volunteers now do you have working in your organization?
We have a list. We have an email list of 400. Yeah, and not everybody. I mean, our groups usually, when we go out, we like to be out in the winter. We don't do July and August because it's too hot, too much poison ivy, ticks. It's just not very comfortable. But it depends on the event. We'll do stuff like we'll have we have a city park we work in a lot. We have a county park we work in a lot. But we'll often go work at what we really like to do is proselytize. So we'll go talk to an HOA, and then somebody in that group takes it on. So so we're not going to every activity. But for instance, right now we are reaching out to these 400 because the Department of Agriculture in Maryland is trying to change a really good new invasive law, but they're trying the nurseries want to weaken it and delay how long they can sell these invasive plants. And we don't have very many invasive plants on the list anyway, so we're asking them to write to the Ag Department.
So that's the part of the advocacy nature of your organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are you just showing up on people's tree lawns and knocking on a door and saying, "Hey, by the way, this tulip poplar"?
No, it's been interesting. A lot of people have really embraced it. Like we've had an article written in a local magazine, and so people will call us. We've had a lot of garden clubs ask us to come, and churches. So there are a lot of different groups that really are interested in this. And how do we somehow, it just keeps going. If we have a week, we've always got our home county park and city park that we work on, and we can always call people out to them. So another thing we did just yesterday, we helped or get organized a county meeting of the different county departments. So we've got forestry and public works and the park system. And so we inspired them, fortunately, to have quarterly meetings just about invasives, because they work with so much land. So yesterday we had one of those meetings, so that was encouraging. But I got to talk. You were asking about the volunteers. We use what is it? It's one of those websites that you just go and invite people to do things with. I'm sorry, it's escaping me now, but it might come to me. That's not my area.
So you guys, it sounds like you're focused on things more than just English ivy. That might have been the thing that sort of galvanized action, but the fact is that you're actually looking at all invasives, and it sounds like you're getting a receptive ear with your local politicians and community administrations.
You know what we're learning is that a lot of these folks know about the problem, but until the citizens step up and ask for it, there are other things for them to be working on too. And so we have been just really impressed with how helpful both the city, the city, the state's a little tougher. We know the city and county better. But like the city will even let us apply, for herbicides to like a big cut, which is very nice to do because you're really getting the roots of it stuff. But so we really have just a wonderful relationship with the city and county. Yeah,
that's fabulous. That's inspiring. That's very inspiring.
And actually, I should say the state. We're also just looking at a piece of property at the end of my neighborhood that the state controls, and one fellow there was saying that he was like they'd kind of given up on invasives because they had a project where they wanted to get rid of Gallery pear. The neighbors got upset about it and didn't want it to be changed, so they canceled the project. Wow. Yeah, so I think they were inspired that we sort of saw things the way they did.
Yeah, there's actually a question Kathy Bradley had posted in the chat. Which invasive plant is Maryland doing a rule on, and how much time are they giving vendors? We gave Ohio 5 years before Gallery pears were banned, but they were selling them at fire sale prices, and too many got planted, which is a good point.
Right. Well, I don't have my list in front of me, but there are only 6 plants that Maryland has outlawed. And I think maybe 2 are in commerce. So it's very ineffective. And we've sort of been saying to them, listen, little Delaware over here, certainly with the help of Doug Tallamy, outlawed in 1 year 37 plants, and they gave them a year to get rid of the inventory. Here in Maryland, I think that the current law is to first we have a very small list. So, and we all know what a lot of these plants are, and English ivy is still for sale. So these folks have known for a long time that this is coming and what the plants really are. So they're asking for maybe another couple of years or something, and we're going to say that we're so far behind anyway that's ridiculous. So anyway, so we have a more detailed, more scientific points to make. But yeah, so you just have to, I think one of the things is that the legislation that was passed is really, really good. But you have to continue to follow the legislation and make sure it gets it gets in place, like and support the budget that it requires. So it's not something that's sort of a one and done. You really have to steward it into its fruition.
And has there been active resistance, do you know, from the nursery industry?
This slowdown is resistance for sure, but they really did buy into the law, which was great. They the folks that worked on it did a great. It was actually some people from the Maryland Native Plant Society that just wrote terrific information and got it pushed through legislation.
So that brings up another question about your organization. And, you know, some people, you know, ask about, for instance, Nature in My Backyard, and, you know, what is the utility of this organization, given there are so many other, there are native plant societies, there's wild ones, there's, you know, all of these things going on out there. And I know that our particular niche is the fact that we're offering the service that we will come to you and do a site inspection and then help that homeowner who might be just, you know, overwhelmed by the amount of information that is out there and not having any idea where to start, to guide them through that process and ultimately, you know, do the things that would certify their yard as habitat. Do you find that coming up with sort of a singular focus, at least initially, about the ivy and save our trees, that you had some pushback from other organizations with sister missions or kindred missions, or how does everyone play nice in the same sandbox?
Well, you know, I really think people view it as a team. It's like a team sport in a way. Everybody has their places to connect with people. And yes, the simplicity of going after English ivy, which is not the only thing we get rid of. We have an awful lot of Asian bittersweet and other things and other invasives. I mean, we see Mahonia, we see privet, we see all kinds of stuff. What we're really focusing on is protecting the canopy first, because that's where the berries spread from, and where the trees are being compromised the most. But yeah, we a lot of the groups around here are about the bay, but of course, protecting canopy trees is critical to protecting from erosion and, you know, a lot of those issues. So having a specific competence or attack, I should say, is really been helpful. And I was wondering that with your program, is that something that Audubon does nationally?
Well, Audubon does have a national program, but this came up basically as an independent thing. Actually, and Jane has logged on, and we might draw her into the conversation.
Hello, everyone.
Because part of this was her desire to, famously in a meeting with Matt Valencic, myself, and Robin, Jane says, "We're not getting any younger, folks, and it's time to do stuff now. We must take action." Yeah. And she had seen similar programs. I'm out in Portland right now, and the Bird Alliance of Oregon has got a certification program for backyard habitat, and they're very, very active at it. And they have actually paid staff to support it. St. Louis Audubon Society and the Bird Alliance of Oregon used to be the Audubon Society here until they changed their name. And so there was a thinking that actually doing this under the aegis of an Audubon Society was a very, very appropriate thing. But the whole opportunity for it to be a collaboration, particularly with a garden club and especially with master gardeners who not only have a wonderful skill set, but also are supposed to put in volunteer hours, utilizing that skill set in support of master gardening programs, that this was sort of a wonderful union of missions, but it could be done under the auspices of an Audubon chapter. So that's kind of how it started. And Jane joined the board of the Audubon Society of Greater Cleveland and has sort of taken it from there. You want to add anything, Jane?
And I would, now the lawnmowers have started, of course. But I just would add that, yes, each local Audubon Society is an independent entity, and so they decide for themselves what their interests are and what direction they'd like to go. And so, and many of them have like huge machines that are like with paid staff doing a lot of great things. So
Wow.
most of the other programs have paid staff, and they have been incredibly generous, speaking to the point of everyone just piling on. They just share freely, and it in that way, it's been a wonderful collaboration with Audubon societies all over the country who've been very willing to help. But Harvey kind of said it all perfectly. The main thing is that people just need a little hand holding to get started. And what Doug Tallamy does is encourages everyone to begin, but it just is so confusing with all the resources out there. So I'm gonna shut off my mic now because you don't want to listen to lawnmowers.
We could do a whole program. Actually, Ginger and I talked about, the scourge of gasoline-powered leaf blowers. First of all, in the nature of their mission of displacing leaf litter from where it could do the most good as a wintering bed for invertebrates, the basis of a food chain that goes on in the backyards, but also because of the noise pollution that drives us all just batty. But that's for another time. Anyway, Ginger, it's fabulous to hear about your success in doing this in a pretty short period of time. I mean, it sounds like you're making a real difference, and particularly your ability to engage it with the community and the state. We are really going to be excited to see what new things Save Our Trees does next, and we will take inspiration from that. But let's circle back to the book, because the book again. So if I didn't mention the entire title of the book, her book is The Essential Native Trees and Shrubs for the Eastern U.S. And it's a guide for sustainable landscaping. And as you say, you had a particular goal in mind to have not a comprehensive list of the complete vascular flora of the state of Maryland or of the Eastern US, but rather a functional guide that limits it to, you said 85 species?
Yeah.
And so how did this come to pass? So no, you kind of just casually said that you and Tony were talking and you decided to write a book. I don't recall that writing a book was in your background.
No, part of it is I think you write about things that you want to know more about. There's that.
Could you speak to the sort of the genesis of the book project, from ideation to implementation?
Sure. A friend of mine from my freshman year in college ended up living in Annapolis as I was. And Tony's wife was a landscape contractor. And so Tony and Della did some work for me, and then we all became friends because we all were interested in plants. And I think it was just, we were both so interested in native plants, which is kind of interesting because he was a horticulturist. And horticulturists are not necessarily oriented toward native plants. But he had lived on this farm for, since he was a kid and just had wonderful plants there, both native and non-native. And I think we just both wanted to know more and to help people focus. Like you all answer the question when you go out into people's properties. Well, okay, now what do I do? We have this information, and one of the pieces of now what do I do is what do I plant? And of course, the woody plants are more expensive. And when you make that investment, I always if I'm going to plant a tree, I want to know that it's serving the environment as well as providing shade and, screening whatever else that tree does. And so we wanted to make it a tool for folks. And of course, it really is applicable to the whole eastern woodland. So that goes even west of the Mississippi into Arkansas, eastern Texas. And a lot of these plants are fairly similar.
Can I just interrupt you there? That when you were doing this is back in 2014, 14, 13?
Probably, yeah.
So you clearly saw this need. I mean, what were you already part of a sustainable landscaping movement at the time, or?
No, no, I
So
think it was right about the time Doug was starting to write. But I don't even think when we started, I just had a feeling that native plants had to be better. I don't really remember how that came about. But then Doug started writing stuff, Doug Tallamy, and we were like, oh my God, this is more important than we thought. You know, so yeah. I mean, now,
your timing was perfect. I mean, literally, what a timely book
well, and it
to come
took
out.
years to write. Tony would come to my kitchen table every Tuesday afternoon, and we would write, and and I'd do the drawings because we weren't getting paid for this. It's not a big money maker. And so, I was the artist too. And, I'd write up articles on the plants and ask Tony, and Tony has such an incredible amount of information. And yeah, so it was well timed, but we kept thinking, this is taking us so long, somebody else is going to do this. But it really hasn't happened because we wanted to meet the balance of having enough information, and information that was not all that easy to collect from from really good sources. We wanted to have enough information on each plant, like how big, how tall it gets over time. We wanted to have an illustration of that, and what, these plants are really quite different from one another, and some have varieties that are really useful, cultivated varieties that have been found in nature. So there was just a lot we wanted to pack in. When somebody chose a tree, we wanted to make sure it was a really a choice they could rely on. So,
and for those of you about the illustrations, I didn't bring the book with me to Portland because there's a limit of what I could carry on. But if you take a look at some of these illustrations here, both of the leaves and there's a lot of wonderful, wonderful illustrations that Ginger did. And then my understanding is that between you and Tony, you took all the photographs in the book as well.
yeah.
Did you have a publisher that you were pushing this to early on in the project?
We thought for sure Timber Press would love this book.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found was, because we were first-time authors, and I think we could probably sell more books. We weren't people who had a platform, and they wanted that. And also, to be fair, I think we didn't really get a plant editor looking at it. So there were people that really thought they ought to do it, but in the end, they didn't. So over coffee with friends, somebody had a neighbor who had been a publisher at National Geographic, and now he had his own company. So Kevin took us on, and we found a publisher, and it's actually it's called Charles Bridge, and they're in Boston, and they distribute through Penguin Random House. So it's it's spread out, but yeah. So yeah.
So in your introduction in the front, you do I think a really, really great case of summarizing the case for planting natives. And I was going to let you go through that, but one of the first ones I thought was such a cool one. It just said, the case for planting natives, our unique palate. We are fortunate. The East Coast of the United States is one of the world's richest areas for native plant material. In many areas of the world's plants face extinction as glaciers force them up an east and west mountain range. But with the Appalachian Mountains running north to south, the advance and retreat of glaciers allowed ancient ecosystems and plants to migrate away from colder or warmer weather. And why we have the diversity that we have here. It was just a really cool starting point about, celebration of not a longing for the past, but a recognition of our biotic heritage. But could you just summarize, the case for planting natives as according to Ginger Woolridge?
So I just pulled the book out. Well, and I'll just go through the topics. The interdependency of wildlife and natural systems, which I think probably a lot of your folks are very familiar with Doug Tallamy, who explains that so beautifully. The fact that most of our lepidoptera, our pollinators, especially the showy monarch, for instance, everybody knows that the monarch, or a lot of people know that the monarch needs milkweed species. But what Doug explains is that the monarch larva is very different from the monarch butterfly. It's an entirely different animal. And that larva needs the milkweed genus to eat because plants protect themselves with toxins, so that these insects need to, over the millennia, adapt to eating this. They have adapted to be able to tolerate that toxin for that particular genus. So this is not just true of the showy monarch, but all of our butterflies and moths and a lot of other insects require native flora. And if we don't have it, we don't have caterpillars. And especially to Audubon, if we don't have caterpillars, we don't have the best baby bird food, because the caterpillars are soft, loaded with fat and carotenoids and all this wonderful food for a baby bird that without an exoskeleton that would be sharp in their throat. And so it's the fundamental food for birds, and birds can't reproduce without it. So like there's a crepe myrtle that had been planted on my property, and as far as caterpillars are concerned, it may as well be plastic. So that interdependency is really important. And then the economy, it's really interesting how, well, first of all, choosing natives, they're going to, in terms of owning them, they're going to require fewer inputs of fertilizer, water, that sort of thing, if you've chosen the right plant. But economically, in other ways, streets that are lined with trees have less crime. Properties that have well taken care of trees are more valuable. So there's that piece of the economy too. And then human health and well-being. Trees, even like people talk about getting infrared light treatments. Trees throw off infrared light along with oxygen and temperature modulation. I mean, if you've ever, a really fun thing to do is get one of those laser thermometers and go out on a hot day and look at how hot pavement is or turf, and then a planting bed. And they vary a lot. So that trees do so much to modulate the temperature in our environment, especially in a hotter environment, which this hotter environment also, I think, is part of what has allowed these invasives to jump ahead. And then the thing about they're being threatened. So yeah. By the deer and the vines. So yeah, that's why we need them.
Well, then I love your case statement, and I love the fact that you guys, it's just not a list of plants, but you go through so much about their attributes, site conditions, and the fact it's both trees and shrubs. And you have it all arranged in such an amazing fashion. Again, I don't have the book here to throw it up and show you everybody examples, but could you talk about how you guys came up with this organization, and then how you envisioned it would be used by anyone in the Nature in My Backyard group?
Yeah, well, it is, what we thought was, it would be for landscapes. It's not a book for naturalizing. It's not like a book for a restoration project. I mean, not that you couldn't use it in some ways for that, but we really thought of people who have the honor and the responsibility to have land and to be able to improve it. So we thought we started with, of course, we have the botanical name and any common names, and then attributes in the landscape. So to allow people to think about how they might use this plant, whether it's for screening or shade or flowers, or you have a particular cultural issue where you might be you might have salt around, whether it's seaside or road salt, or you might want a particular size plant. So we wrote about that. And for instance, like I've seen something I see very in my neighborhood, there's a dry cleaner that has all these river birches in front of it. And they were coming up into a wire for some kind of transmission. And so they basically turned it into a vertical hedge. And I had who would think that river birch could take that kind of pruning? But it does. So there are all kinds of interesting things you can do with these plants. So after the attributes and how you might use it, and I know we mentioned whether some plants are better for wildlife than others. And then seasons of interest, because we like to design around that. They're little drawings for winter, spring, and summer and autumn, and what the attributes might be. And then in form, we give a size that a plant would get to if it were standing alone and had sun. A lot of times, if a tree's in the woods, they might get taller because they're competing with other trees and be thinner. But a lot of times, like a tulip poplar can be skinny and straight, and it's so obvious in the woods. But if it's in a field, it's a different kind of tree. And you see that in the Northeast a lot of times. They have these trees called wolf trees that I think were sort of the last trees standing and maybe left when they cleared pastures, partly because they could be used for leverage to pull down other trees, but then your cattle or your sheep or something would need some shade as well. So you'll see sometimes in woods, there'll be a lot of straight up smaller trees, but then there's also a big one. Anyway, that's that. So anyway, but form, then I did a drawing of how tall the tree would be at different ages. And I'm looking at shagbark hickory right here. So we have a drawing of what it would be like at 20 years and how big it would be at 80 years. And we also put a person in the drawings because that helps me anyway, just see, it makes you can feel the size of the plant. And then we have a little box that's sort of quick to use, which talks about what USDA zones. And all these plants would live in Cleveland. And then also what type of sun, moisture, and pH they like. And then well, I should summarize, I guess. Designers use form, color, and texture. So after form, then we go to color, and both foliage, the foliage, and any type, if there's any floral display and what time of year that would be. And then texture is sort of like the texture of the leaves, where like with a shagbark hickory, for instance, you've got a large compound leaf. If you were looking at like winterberry holly, they'd be smaller, finer leaves. So that would be fine. And then under culture, we get more into like what each particular plant is like, and also where it would occur naturally. Not all of these plants would live in Cleveland, for instance, but they might not be endemic there. They may not have been there before, but a lot of the eastern woodland, like we've got hickories here. I'm sure you've got hickories there. There are hickories in East Texas, but not everything's that way. And some plants have been removed, like the yellowwood, for instance, was used for dye around the Civil War time, so that we lost a lot of those because they were used that way. So the species have moved around some, but most of them do live in the eastern woodland. So we talk about where we know their original range is, but also then where they will live anywhere. And then we've got then we go into like whether deer particularly like them or not. Always a little unpredictable.
Always,
yeah,
but important to know.
Yeah, like and here's, for instance, in this one, we say deer usually will not bother trees taller than 8 feet, but smaller plants should be protected from browsing and antler rubbing. So because like in this shagbark hickory, it's got that wonderful shaggy bark that actually they've studied female bats will raise their young under them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Particularly things like big brown bats, or some of the solitary bats like
Okay.
hoary bats and red bats.
Yeah, and I think that's a study from Indiana, maybe. So
Yeah.
out your way. And then companion plants, where the plants would typically grow. And I think somebody asked, I thought I saw a question come up about that, but what would typically grow with these plants as understory? And then a little bit on wildlife. And actually, when we were writing that, there's so many more associations of caterpillars with different species now than when we published the book because of Talamy's studies and other people. So we know more about that now. But yeah, so that's what we, I don't know. It was so fun to study individual plants.
And then the way that you've laid that out, and then also in the introduction to the book, you've got this basically. Here's a list of all of the trees that are salt tolerant. Here's so that you've got a code at least that takes you to that. So in sort of one handy spot, you can easily navigate towards the plants whose attributes you desire to have in your particular yard. I think it's fabulous. I think you guys were prescient in terms of knowing what kinds of needs, and you talk about soil moisture, and you even have a pH nutrient chart. And I mean, it's an amazing compendium of information that is not overwhelming. It's incredibly accessible and digestible. And I'm a raptor guy. I'm not the gardener in my family. So I used to take care of the things that eat the plants. So I worked further up the food chain. But I found the book to be just really, really accessible and a very, very important addition to this whole movement that we're engaged in.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot to me coming from a naturalist.
Well, I have one complaint. It doesn't fit. It's not a field guide. It doesn't fit in your back pocket. And this is something that our volunteers in Nature in My Backyard, it's a wonderful tool to take with it. And oftentimes when we sit down with a homeowner, after doing a site inspection, your book comes out to show folks what they are, but it's a little unwieldy in the field, but it's a remarkable thing. So
yeah, I mean, maybe we should go through it and make some waterproof cards of the abridged version. I don't know if I want to abridge it. How we could.
So tell me how. I mean, I wasn't aware of it until Jane introduced it to me. What's been the response to, I mean, how has it sold well? Has it sounds like it's been received well, and you received high praise from Doug Talamy himself.
Yeah.
How has it been received, and is it being used in the way that you envisioned it would be?
It has. Like when I meet landscape architects, they I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he's an international landscape architect, and I heard him speak one time, and I really don't market it well enough. If anybody wants to get Christmas presents and send them all over the Eastern Woodland, that'd be great. But so because I've gone off in this, I don't really market it a lot, and I really should do better. I feel pretty guilty about that. But this one landscape architect, I said, so, I came to hear you speak, and I don't mean to be, shameless commerce, but are you familiar with this book? And he said, and it was my copy that's all, got all stickies through it and all kinds of notes. And he goes, I do have it, and it looks just like that. So that made me feel really good. And that Joe the gardener called me up one time, or he sent a video introducing himself to me, and I don't know if you know him. He's on PBS.
I don't. But...
Yeah, and so he's mostly a food guy, but he's had Doug on and stuff. And I said, oh, our book, and he said, yeah, it's beside my bed. So when you hear something like that, it's like really
little light bedside reading.
yeah, it's really nice. So yeah,
so
I should sell it more though.
yes, you should. So,
Yeah.
you know, and I know it's not like you're not doing anything, Ginger.
I
You've gone
know.
on to your next with Save Our Trees.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I guess because we need to wrap up our conversation, I do want to get there's a few comments and questions that we can get here. But
Yeah.
one of the things that we always and you and I had talked about this last week, you know, sometimes you see a pie chart of all the terrible things that are going on, all the problems in the world, and what we really need is a pie chart of solutions.
Yeah.
The whole idea about finding and fostering hope. I mean, I love hearing what you're doing with Save Our Trees and the fact that you're getting currency with your local municipalities as well as the state, and that you actually might be able to effect sort of widespread change and at least much better stewardship of native trees. But do you have any other thoughts or any other words of inspiration about finding and fostering hope in these rather uncertain times?
Well, one thing we often say is, why take on a small project? Let's just save the eastern woodlands.
Here, 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 here. That's right. That's what we say about nature in my backyard. What are we doing? We're saving the world.
Right, right,
So,
right. So yeah, I mean, we are very encouraged by what we've seen. I mean, I think we're really fortunate in that we have a group of people who we're retired. We're not worried that somebody else is going to get the presidency of the corporation. You know, we're all working on the same project. And if anything drives us, it's like, oh my goodness, somebody got that done. I've got to go get something else done, you know. And so we have a really good group that works very well together with different skill, and we appreciate each other's skill sets a lot. And then I just have to say that helping, you know, we always say we are the we and we the people. And if you want improvements, you know, democracy isn't a spectator sport. We got to get in there and help our legislators and the folks who run our parks, and inspire them in their work, because and the more we educate the population about the issue, the more people can respect the work that the government is doing and maybe jump in and help out.
you find that your experience running a political action committee it gives you some insights in how to work through the machinery of state or federal government?
You know, you just you know, I think it's that you have to put your curiosity to work and figure
Hmm.
out where the levers are.
Interesting. I like that.
Yeah, because we don't want to waste our time.
Yep.
We want to find out who is the person making the decisions and what motivates them, and can we help them understand where we're coming from, and maybe we've got something to do together. Like yesterday's meeting with the parks and a guy who does restoration for the public works and the forestry department is just really great to get all those heads together and see where there are places where we can help them be more efficient. Like we've been asking for a permanent position. Right now, the state has financial issues, and the county, of course, does too. But they've been having a volunteer from the oh God, what is it? One of those nationally funded groups for conservation, and a conservation corps volunteer who's likely somebody who's out of school, will come for a year. If they get a better job offer, they will leave. And they can't really be in a position to run volunteers. Well, we're saying the county, wouldn't it be good if you had a permanent volunteer coordinator for all the groups, not just us? But you know, if there's Audubon, maybe Audubon can plug in some place, or you know, or Wild Ones, or everybody can plug in different places maybe, and build your army of volunteers. But you really need a permanent person in the county. It's got to be somebody who knows what's going on and is going to continue to be there to develop a program.
That's a great idea. And the fact that, encouraging municipalities not to be afraid of volunteers, but rather harness the extraordinary power of volunteers and volunteerism. Great
Right.
idea.
We
Okay,
see it
well,
as leveraging their work. So
yeah. Let's get to the comments and questions we've got. Let's see. Someone says, Kathy says, I have your book. It's great.
thank
Someone
you.
else says, I can't wait to get the book. I'm going to get to answer that one later.
I saw a comment, the sign up genius is in fact how we.
It is, that's what
yes.
you use? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder.
And let's see, Patricia said, agree, I'm just trying to put in a native privacy fence in backyard, remove 6 privets and an uncountable number of rows of Sharon, and figuring out appropriate natives and how to plant them has my head spinning. Can't be very tall due to overhead wires. Any suggestions? It's pretty wide open. You want to wade in?
Well, I just saw, is this the Patricia who gave a website that she had a document that showed plants, sort of plant this, not that kind of
right.
list.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually been working on one of my own and gave it to my my neighborhood association at our meeting this past weekend. A group that's really good has a really good website about identifying natives or invasives and alternatives is the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia. It's MGNV. And if you look for invasive plants there, they are really good at replacement plants. But the only thing I've ever seen published was by, I think, the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And the fellow only matched up one plant to one plant. And that's not really helpful because you might have barberry because you want something purple or you want something thorny or whatever, but there may be a lot of reasons you'd want barberry. And so you really need to offer up a range of plants that might meet some of those attributes. But I did like that, and I will look up the Cuyahoga WCD org and see what theirs looks like too, because maybe I should write another book on that.
Oh, there you go. See,
yeah,
you got time on your hands, right?
Oh yeah.
Mary said the book calls out several cultivated varieties. Are the ones you list, quote, okay, unquote? That is, do they have the same wildlife attractions? There are so many cultivars on the market, it's very hard to tell which are okay and which to avoid.
Yeah, there are. And I would say that from what I understand, most of the cultivar discussion about whether it's as supportive of insects against the species, for instance, with the species, you're going to have more biodiversity for sure. But most of that conversation is around perennials.
Mm-hmm.
And Mount Cuba Center, I don't know if you all know Mount Cuba Center, is a wonderful resource. Their website's terrific. And they are a native plant garden in Delaware that's got an incredible endowment. It's one of the old DuPont estates like Longwood Gardens. Mm-hmm. And their website, and they've also done studies of a lot of these perennials. Like they've done a wonderful study of one of our native hydrangeas, not oak leaf, the other one, arborescens. And so they studied all these different plants. I now have a hydrangea that's a native hydrangea called Haas Halo, and it's teeming with with insect life, and it takes a lot of sun, which is of course atypical of hydrangeas. So with trees, there's less concern. I'm going, sorry, so long-winded. With trees, there's less concern about the different cultivars. One thing I love is oh God, what's the name of that tree? The one that has all the little prickly balls. Where's my mind? Anyway, it'll come to me.
Like a sweet gum?
Sweet gum. There's a naturally occurring variety that doesn't have, it's not supposed to have any of the sweet gum balls, which I kind of like for mulch. But it is fruit I have one that it's a beautiful plant and has one branch that's got the little sweet gum things on it. So it's really not as big an issue, is my answer with woody plants.
Hey, I think that we're probably run out. I just want to direct folks, if you look in the chat, like Amy from Avonlea Gardens mentions they've created an awesome spreadsheet listing all their native inventory. They call it Spreadsheet Mega. They'll be putting up their website. Try Planet Native and Meadow Creek Nursery. Also, Cynthia put that. So there are some places you can go to looking for lists of natives that are appropriate and actually where to get them. And if you actually go to Nature in My Backyard's website, we have a curated list of resources as well. We're not so much about, it's just, it's a great place to check it out. And I have to give a shout out because people have been asking about it. So once again, this September, on the 20th of September, that would be a Saturday from 8:15 to 3:30, the Master Gardeners of Cuyahoga County are having their fall seminar, and the keynote speaker under the theme, the overall theme of the seminar is gardening for a healthier yard and community. Your keynote speaker will be none other than Ginger Woolridge. So, and my understanding is that it's sponsored by Master Gardeners of Cuyahoga County, but that would be open to anybody. And we will list more information about how you can find out about that later, but just pencil that in. Saturday, the 9th, Saturday, September 20th, I'm sorry, the 20th of September, 8:15, I assume as keynotes, you're probably the lead-off speakers. So you want to actually be there and see Ginger in person, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person as well at that thing. And I just wanted to thank you for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for a magnificent book and resource, and everything that you are doing in helping advance this mission that we all are subscribing to, and that is creating healthy, sustainable, native, and viable landscapes where we live, in our communities, in our yards, and everywhere else. Thank you, Ginger.
Oh, thank you, Harvey and Jane. What you all are doing is so encouraging too. Yeah.
And thank you, Ginger, for donating your time today. Very generous of you.
Oh, my pleasure.
We certainly appreciate that. And Harvey, as ever, yes? Okay. Anyway.
Thank you, Jane.
Everyone for tuning in, and we'd be excited to come to any gardens we haven't been to yet.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.